the United States, they announced that they seized 4 Iranian oil tankers on their way to Venezuela. Let me just show you very quickly. This is from the Wall Street Journal. So the Trump administration expects these seizures will deter shipping companies from dealing with Iran and Venezuela. So once again, as you know, Venezuela and Iran are both under sanctions. Venezuela is sitting on the largest oil reserves in the planet, but because of sanctions, because of Western interference, they can't refine the crude oil, right? And even extraction has become a problem, but they can't refine it. And so Iran has been sending them fuel in exchange for gold. And because they found a way around it, that's why the UK government stole about $1 billion worth of Venezuelan gold that they had in the Bank of England. Yeah, they just straight up stole it. So the Trump administration claims that they seized these 4 fuel tankers, okay? Now, however, the Iranian ambassador to Venezuela, he says it's not true. So he posted on Twitter a screenshot of the headline. So these tankers are the Luna, Pandi, Bering, and Bella. And now allegedly they've been redirected and brought to Houston. And he says that it's all made up and it's a propaganda stunt. The Trump administration are just trying to make themselves look good because they've been defeated by Iran and the sanctions that they've tried imposing are effectively useless. Sayyid Mohammad Marandi, who is, he's a professor at the University of Tehran. I covered him before when he clobbered Mehdi Hassan on Iran and Syria. That was amazing. So he also agrees. He says that it's just a propaganda stunt. He posted about this earlier. Iranian tankers and fuel haven't been stolen by the US regime. Just as Western and Saudi reports about Hezbollah storing weapons in Beirut port were fake, this was also a lie. They lied about the port to hide the corruption of their allies and lied about tankers to compensate for their weakness. So I think he also went on RT. Once again, he reasserts that the ships and fuel were not Iranian. Iran sends fuel with its own ships and flags. The US stole these tankers from people who purchased the fuel legally.
Syed Mohammad Marandi from the University of Tehran. Thank you for joining us on the programme. It's great to see you. Now, the Iranian ships were heading to Venezuela, and yet a US district court order results in the cargo being seized. Does that stand up legally?
Well, first of all, they weren't Iranian ships, and my understanding is that it wasn't Iranian fuel. It was probably fuel, if it was indeed going to Venezuela and it is Iranian fuel, then it was purchased by businessmen and they were taking it to Venezuela on their own. So what the Americans did was that they stole, and this is theft. And this is, I think, one of the extraordinary things about the United States today, especially under Trump, that it's becoming more crude in the way in which it conducts itself. It's behaving like an ordinary thief. The pretenses and the so-called international law and the international order, that's all cast aside, and I think that's a sign of weakness on behalf of the United States. But in any case, this would be fuel that's been purchased by private individuals from the Iranians, because if the Iranians wanted to send their own fuel, they would use their own ships, as they did a couple of months ago. The Iranians sent 5 ships full of fuel to Venezuela with the Iranian flag, Iranian insurance, Iranian ships, and there was no problem, and the Americans did not do anything about it because they knew there would be consequences.
Well, that's a very interesting twist. The timing is very curious as well. This incident comes just before the UN decides whether to extend the arms embargo in Iran, which was proposed by the US. Do you think that could be linked?
I think it has more to do with the election in the United States, the presidential election, and the elections in general in the United States, and that Trump wants to show himself as strong. But again, I think what it really does is that it shows the lawlessness of the regime in Washington and how petty they've become in their behavior. They just simply behave like pirates of the 18th and 17th century on the high seas. They declare whoever they want to be terrorists or outlaws, and they steal just like the The gold used to be stolen from ships in previous centuries, and this sort of behavior is going to have consequences, because ultimately, while the Iranian government does not own the oil, but Iran will have to punish the United States in order to protect the people who purchase Iranian oil, so that tomorrow the Americans don't go after people who do business with Iran. So I think ultimately the Americans are going to have to pay a price, and I think the Americans are misleading themselves, and their advisors in the United States are misleading them. The Iranians will definitely punish the United States, but they'll find their own way of punishing the United States. When the Iranians see that the Americans will abide by no rules, then that basically means the rapprochement or any sort of truce with Americans is impossible, and the Iranians will hit back, but in their own way.
So how do you expect the Iranian government to respond?
Once again, like I said, Mohammad Merendi, awesome guy. I love him. And everything he said is 100% correct. I mean, the manner in which the United States conducts itself, particularly in matters of foreign policy, they're just like pirates. They're bandits. I mean, not only do they invade other countries and plunder their resources, just like they're doing now with the Kurds in Hasaka in northeastern Syria, subsidizing a private company to come and steal Syrian oil, and just like they stole the oil from Iraq, and they're trying to get their hands on Venezuela's oil. But, if those ships were sent by Iran, just as Professor Merendi pointed out, they would have had Iranian flags, and they're not going to hide that they belong to them. I mean, the way they portray it in the U.S. media, they act as if Iran is scared of the United States. I'm pretty sure they're not. They're one of the only countries that stands up to the United States. They would not hide it, just like they did not hide the last tankers that they sent, the first 5, right? What is there to hide? I mean, the entire concept is so indicative of the manner in which they think. All of these journalists, all of the Western media, they act as if Iran and Venezuela need permission to trade from the U.S. Who said they need permission from anyone? Who is the U.S.? These sanctions are U.S. sanctions. They're meaningless. They're not international sanctions. Do you understand? America has no business, the United States has no business telling Iran anything. Not about oil tankers or not about its nuclear program. Zero. Get that straight. Same thing for any other country. They have to respect Iran's sovereignty, and they have no business dictating which ships can pass through international waters. America, the United States, is the one that has their navy parked off of the Persian Gulf, not the other way around. So you tell me who's bullying who. You tell me who is trying to intimidate the other. Does Iran have their navy off of the coast of Florida? I don't think so. Is Iran flying drones over American airspace? I don't think so. Is Iran telling the U.S. what kind of nuclear energy they can have and sticking their nose in their business? I don't think so. Iran doesn't help to assassinate nuclear scientists inside of the U.S. So don't get it twisted, okay? The U.S. are just trying to bully and intimidate other countries to the point that they're even lying about it. Once again, it's not just the Trump administration, but I've seen other news outlets report about this in the same way, like, oh, look, we found satellite imagery of Iran handing off oil secretly and acting as if like they've committed the gravest crime in history, or as if they have anything to hide. Once again, Iran does not need your permission or your approval or your validation to do anything. Never mind engage in trade with an ally. You have no business and no say in that. Nada. End of story. Okay? But they want to write and talk about these countries in the global south that won't bend the knee to Uncle Sam. They talk about them in a manner as if they are by nature evil. As if they are by definition de facto nefarious. Which shows you once again, their entire mentality and policy is driven by white supremacy and imperialism. Like, oh, we are the police. We are the ones who decide. We are the moral arbiters. And we get to dictate who can trade and who can do what and who is evil and who is good. That shows you the arrogance that emanates from the United States and the West. Once again, for a long time now, but particularly just in the last year, you can see very clearly how the United States is trying to provoke Iran into a war. In January, they assassinated General Qasem Soleimani. Just a few weeks ago, they sent those fighter jets to harass a civilian airliner that was flying on its way to Beirut. Military jets harassing a civilian airliner. Unbelievable. A few months ago, when Iran sent the first 5 tankers to Venezuela, Mike Pompeo was threatening to stop them, as if he has any say in the matter. Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal. And then they accuse Iran of, oh my God, they're enriching uranium. What? You tore up the deal. That's your fault. And then they flew a drone over Iranian airspace. And when Iran rightfully shot it down, just like any country would, the United States has the stones to come out and say, oh, it's an act of war. No, you flying a drone over their airspace is an act of war. Don't get it twisted. So these are just a few examples of how the United States keeps trying to prod and keeps trying to provoke Iran and bully them and intimidate them and then claim that they are the bad ones. Not to mention the fact that they have their an entire fleet parked off of their coast in the Persian Gulf. You just look at these facts, all these incidents I mentioned to you, and you tell me who is bullying the other and who is trying to intimidate the other. It's very, very evident and very clear who the aggressor is. Very evident. But of course, in the media, they brainwash you into thinking, oh, Iran is evil, Syria is evil. All these countries that won't do what the West wants, that won't bend the knee, are they're repressive and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, we know the script. Boring. If Iran had dared to do just one of these things that I mentioned, like harassing a civilian airliner with military jets, the United States would declare an all-out war. Yet it's okay for them to bully Iran the entire time and try and provoke them into a conflict. Not to mention the arms embargo, which was just brought up. That was AIPAC pushing that. Elliot Engel wrote that letter, and then Ilhan Omar signed it. Oh yeah, the progressive who wants to dictate what countries on the other side of the globe can do. The United States tore up the JCPOA. They tore up the Iran nuclear deal just so they can go back to provoking an all-out war. They don't quit, man.